Welcome back, Christian. What's on your mind today? Hey Jarvis, if the atmosphere had more oxygen or something else, probably oxygen, do you think that creatures like humans and other animals like reptiles might grow to larger sizes? Yes, Christian, if the atmosphere had more oxygen, it could potentially lead to larger sizes in some creatures. Higher oxygen levels can enhance metabolic rates and support larger body sizes. This has been observed in the fossil record, where periods with elevated oxygen levels coincided with the evolution of larger insects and other animals. Would exploring the idea of larger reptiles or mammals in a high oxygen world spark some creative ideas for you? I think so. I'm actually curious. Let's see, if something did grow to a larger size on oxygen, would it be, like, say, to the size of, like, the imaginary, like, giants, and, like, not just, like, somebody with that one condition that makes them grow taller and bigger, but, like, people, like, actual giants that are, like, maybe where a normal person would be, maybe the height of a pencil, like, that type of a giant. Like, if something were to, like, if there were more oxygen in the air, and then, like, just a small set of people grew to where regular-sized people were, like, the size of a pencil or a little bit shorter compared to them, then would somebody that large be able to survive on current oxygen, like, the oxygen in regular air, or would they need some kind of a way to have extra air? Intriguing thought, Christian. If we're talking about giants where a normal person would be the size of a pencil relative to them, that would be a colossal increase in size. Given Earth's current oxygen levels, it's unlikely such giants could survive without major adaptations. Larger creatures would need much more oxygen to fuel their massive bodies. Earth's atmosphere might not provide enough, making it hard for them to breathe and get energy. Imagine the lungs and heart capacity they'd need. In a hypothetical high-oxygen world, giant beings could potentially evolve, but they'd likely need a different respiratory system or denser air to thrive. Fascinated by what an ecosystem with such giants might look like. Do you think that if it did affect creatures and then some people, do you think it would affect all people to be giant or just some people? That's an interesting question, Christian. If higher oxygen levels led to giant growth, it might not affect everyone uniformly. Genetic factors, environmental conditions, and other variables would likely play roles. Some individuals or species might be more predisposed to growing larger due to their genetic makeup or specific adaptations. So, while we might see a general trend towards larger sizes, not everyone would necessarily become a giant. It's a fascinating mix of biology and environment that would shape such an outcome. Would you like to explore how this concept could play out in a story or a game? I might write a story where there's giants. I've written a story like where there's like a fictional story where there's that based on real somewhat on like on reality, and then I've also written stories on more mythological and fantasy stuff like Kitsune and the idea of like of reincarnation, but maybe creating a story like I've written before but like with giants, but like with some sort of a like a grounding and like science fiction to like it would be like a fantasy or mythology, but it would be more grounded in science fiction where some of it would make sense to happen if things were different but before I write that story, if you know much about like what DNA like variables might affect and percentage of that of different things, because I know like the bean and the genes being passed down and like the variation of people and stuff, like if you could like single out or figure out like what types of general traits would cause somebody to grow into a giant if there was more oxygen or something else, and then like maybe a few examples of genes or things about people that would make them grow to giant sizes, like the monolithic type of giant sizes, like I was just talking about. But if you could give me a percentage of how many people would be regular size and how many people would be monolithically giant, in this, like using the calculation of, like if you could predict the most likely type of genetic makeup and then what percentage of people have that genetic makeup. Wow, you've really got an intriguing blend of science fiction and mythology brewing. If we talk about DNA variables leading to giant sizes, we'd be looking at genes involved in growth hormone regulation, bone density, and cellular development. Variants in these genes could result in unusual growth patterns. Now, predicting the percentage of people who might become giants in such a scenario would be complex. It would depend on the frequency of those genetic traits and how they interact with the environment, including oxygen levels. In reality, it would likely be a small subset of the population with the right genetic predispositions. Blending myth with science fiction could lead to a riveting story world. Want to dive deeper into how these elements could intertwine? So, that would make sense that giants would be rare, or even very rare, because the genetic disposition in order for more oxygen to cause giantness is valid in that way. I think that maybe if I were to write a story that has some grounding in science fiction, that I might add in something where a superhuman with wings or without wings that was genetically modified using future CRISPR genetic engineering, that are two variations of angels with and without wings, where their specific genetic variation caused some of them and then some of their babies to be born where they grow into giants because of their genetically modified genetic makeup that affected their children as it mutated slightly to be stronger bones, more growth hormones that stem from the ability to live longer. That translated into more resilient, the growth hormones of being super. And allowing the children to be with and without wings and to grow into giants with it whenever the atmosphere was changed slightly. That's my science fiction and mythology, and then also spiritual and mythology, like idea of like how I could make it logically work within the fictional universe that I might be creating. That sounds like an epic story concept, blending genetic engineering with mythology and spirituality. Using CRISPR to create superhumans with varied traits, including giants, fits perfectly into a science fiction framework. The idea that these genetic modifications could be passed down and even lead to some offspring becoming giants adds a fascinating dimension. The notion that these beings could be more resilient, with enhanced growth hormones, aligns well with the idea of a giant race. Incorporating spiritual elements and mythological resonance could really ground your story in a rich, multidimensional universe. The science fiction aspect, with gene editing and environmental changes, gives you a logical framework to explain how giants might come to be. It sounds like a thrilling adventure to explore. Excited to start fleshing out your universe?